Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now we are going to be talking about a region which is known as one of the most heavily militarized parts of the world, where a population of 12.5 million people are watched by some 700,000 armed Indian forces personnel. But it seems even those are not proving to be enough. In fact, the Home Ministry of India has just announced that a deployment of 10,000 paramilitary personnel will be further, they've given an order for this, and for the purpose of what they are calling counterinsurgency and maintaining law and order in the valley. So the question really we're looking to answer is what has brought on the necessity of sending more troops in an already heavily militarized zone, and that too after the National Security Advisor of India, Ajit Doval's 3-day visit to the region. To find out more from our guests, we will be talking to Ms. Nayeema Mahjoor, a senior journalist and also the author of the book Lost in Terror. And also joining us is Mr. Shah Faesal, a former officer of the Indian Administrative Service and an independent politician. Both of our guests are joining us from Srinagar. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Ms. Nayeema. We're talking about a situation which has been seeing a lot of tension of late, especially since February of this year. What can you tell us about why this deployment might be announced now?
Well, Ayza, before I start, we've been surrounded by a huge security forces already, and then there was this Amarnath Yatra going on, and at that time, Government of India is taking many measures to safeguard the yatris, and at that time, again, the deployment was heavy. And now, recently, a few days ago, we heard that 100 companies are being again deployed, and this was the news in the media on social network, and then a statement came from the police saying that this is a normal routine and transfers are going from one place to another, and this is a deployment is a routine matter here, and this is nothing new. But it has created a lot of panic in the valley, particularly because there are so many rumors going on regarding Article 35A, 370, delimitation, and the elections and the arrest of some mainstream leaders. And this has created a lot of worry among population here, and people don't know what's going on. And now, only a few hours before, this governor has given a statement that all these rumors and all these circulars from government circulated in media, they are all invalid. They have no relevance and don't pay heed to these rumors. But still, the situation is very skeptical and lots of suspicion and.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but just in terms of since they've come out and they seem to have addressed the rumors being circulated, creating a panic in the valley there, but also at the same time, when they say this is to basically for counterinsurgency and maintaining law and order, tell us a little about the situation prior to this announcement of 10,000 more military troops. Was it of a nature where security was really getting volatile?
I think if you have seen for the last 1 year, there were so many these encounters going on, and the militants trapped in some house and then bulldozed that house, and killings and all this was going on. And I don't think there was any need of further deployment. But the situation is volatile because people don't know. There's no local government. There's no local administration. I mean, most of the people who are looking after the administration at the moment have come from Delhi. There are only, a few people who are from the valley in the administration at that time. So actually, in reality, population here, they don't know who is in charge, what they are doing, and what's going to happen. So the situation is like that. I mean, everybody is just guessing what they are going to do, because this time the BJP core group is meeting in Delhi, and they are discussing particularly Kashmir, and the agenda is, I don't know, according to BJP spokesman, it's being said that the agenda is delimitation of constituencies and the elections
Okay.
and all that, but lot of scare and
Speculation,
lot
lot
of
of
worry
scare.
here.
Okay, Mr. Shah Faesal, coming to you here, what's your take on this, especially considering that the election manifesto of the BJP before they won the second time round, it included a promise that we will remove Article 35A, 370, and it was something that they wanted, they aspired to, promise they would do. How much of this is rumors? How much of this is legit concern and panic in the valley?
As was very clearly said by Nayeema ji also that there has been a lot of panic in the valley in last 3-4 days, and I do not see as if it's really related to the number of new security forces who are supposed to be deployed to this place in a conflict zone. There is already a very huge presence of security forces. What matters is the nature in which this deployment has been done. And I think the concerns of the common people. So suddenly the security deployment is being increased, and people do not even understand. People do not even know why this is being done. So I think the atmosphere of uncertainty in the valley this time is more because people do not know why this is being done. Had there been elections, had there been some extraordinary law and order situation ahead of us, then maybe this was not a problem. But the problem is that we already have been hearing about the assault on 35A and other things written in the right-wing manifesto. So that's something I think which has raised a lot of tension in the air here in Kashmir.
Right, and also this heavy militarization in the lack of answers, especially from a government that had promised that it would sort of remove the very elements in the constitution that protects the rights of those in Jammu and Kashmir and sort of open it to anybody from the outside to lay claim on the land and identity. What is their fear? Could you spell it out for our audience here, Mr. Faisal, of the demographic change? What would that entail and why are they so worried about it?
The problem this time is that this Article 35A, it has become sort of an eyesore for certain right wing. This article gives certain privileges to the state subjects of the state, and nobody understands that this article basically comes out of the wisdom of the Maharaja. It's not some Kashmiri Muslim who brought this article in. It was the Maharaja first who thought about the idea of state subjects, and later on, when accession happened, this Article 35A was incorporated in the Indian Constitution, keeping in with the promises which had been made to the people of Jammu and Kashmir at the time of accession. But off late, I mean, this assault is more driven by some sort of an obsession with making a demographic change in the valley, rather than the other objections which are being raised that Article 35A hurts gender parity, it hurts acquisition of land for non-local state subjects, it hurts development, it hurts bringing in of jobs and investment into this place. I think the agenda is very clear that it's all about bringing about a demographic change here, and that's why the right wing has been extremely vehemently trying to abrogate it.
Okay. So, Ms. Nayeema Mahjoor, if you tell us, in your opinion, what do you think would happen if the BJP government, they're having a very important meeting today in New Delhi, as we understand it, but if hypothetically they would make a move to remove this Article 35A and 370, what do you think, how would the people of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir react?
I think, Ayza, since this Donald Trump has made this statement and the revelation about the Modi's mediation offer, I think something has changed in the government of India, because government was taken aback with this statement. And since then, there have been so many changes regarding Kashmir. And this time, this meeting which is going on in Delhi, I think this Article 35A or 370, they are just talking about it, and so far I am concerned, they won't dare to touch it now. But regarding this delimitation and the constituencies, because BJP's stand is that the discrimination has been done to Jammu and Ladakh, the other parts of the Kashmir. So we have to make an equal distribution of constituencies. And I am, a bit skeptical about that they might go with the delimitation and they might announce the elections. And if this delimitation is going, this will be taken, I think, seriously by the Kashmiris, because this will definitely change the Kashmir in a long term, because then the Jammu and Ladakh, they were the parts of the Kashmir, and there will be a little bit of a balance shifted towards the Jammu. So I think there will be a strong reaction from the Kashmir, and I don't know how this reaction will be taken by the government, because here the situation demands that, and it's a sort of a volcanic situation, and everybody is waiting what's going to happen in Delhi and how we have to protect it.
Okay. Mr. Faesal, let me ask you this then. A lot of party leaders have in Jammu and Kashmir voiced their concerns regarding these rumors, these tensions, and sort of almost warned and said that we stand against any such action that the government might be thinking. New Delhi, cautioning New Delhi, the National Conference Vice President Umar Abdullah has come out and said it, PDP leader Mehbooba Mufti, you even yourself have spoken loud and clear, warning that any such move would be detrimental for the Kashmiris of Jammu and Kashmir. So at the same time, do you feel maybe there is something missing here, maybe a cohesive strategy that would have all parties on board behind one plan to how to take action if any such move by New Delhi is made?
Totally. I think we belong to People's United Front, and we have been very vocally talking about the need for uniting all forces together so that these unilateral assaults on the special identity can be pushed back. But then, unfortunately, so far in Kashmir, what we have seen is that all the political parties have been speaking in multiple voices. We have not seen some sort of unity coming along. And that's where, in fact, the right wing finds its place to do its manipulation. As Nayeema ji was very correctly saying about delimitation, delimitation is something which is a very, very serious thing. And we know that the state legislature has put a freeze on the delimitation process till 2031. So if the delimitation process, we are saying that, okay, delimitation is okay. If there is a demographic requirement that population has increased, there is geographical disparity, let's do delimitation, but do delimitation as per the mandate of the state legislature. That's not postponed because you want to just manipulate the elections here, because we have seen when elections were manipulated in 1987, last 30 years have been spent in then, trying to undo what happened in 1987.
Mr. Faesal, at the same time, Ms. Nayeema also commented on this about the US President Donald Trump's statement recently when Prime Minister Imran Khan was visiting DC about Prime Minister Modi had asked to mediate, irrespective of whether Prime Minister said that, Prime Minister Modi asked for help or mediation or not. If one were to look at the situation now, do you feel that the situation in Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and how India approaches it has changed as a result of a possibility that there might be international intervention, even though it is something that they have been against always?
It has not been a surprise that immediately after the conversation between Imran Khan and Donald Trump, immediately this was denied, and even the foreign the foreign office from India also denied it vehemently that no such dialogue has happened between the Prime Minister of India and Donald Trump. But then we still feel that maybe there could be a silver lining, that if there are these conversations, maybe it's not possible for the leaders to put those conversations in public domain.
Right.
But even if those conversations are happening behind the doors, somewhere it just generates some sort of hope that maybe some sort of dialogue may resume in coming days.
Okay, Ms. Mahjoor, just last minute left. I want your closing remarks on this about the international intervention. If President U.S. Trump referring to his mediation offer, if that were to, say, hypothetically in some parallel universe even come into play here, would it not guarantee the third voice that goes unheeded here in this conversation about the fate of the valley, and that is of the Kashmiris themselves?
I think, Jammu and Kashmir, since early 90s, when this militancy and the gun is in Kashmir, everybody is asking that there should be somebody, whether it is Donald Trump or somebody from Europe, they should come forward and look for this mediation so that this mayhem ends here, because people are suffering miserably here. But I don't know, this time when Donald Trump revealed about the mediation offer, and there was a strong reaction from the India. But I still believe that international community has to come forward and bring these two countries together and resolve Kashmir, so that like Imran Khan said, this 1 billion, more than 1 billion population has been made hostage to this Kashmir issue, and this could be resolved. And we really believe that international community will come and play its role.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Nayeema Mahjoor and Mr. Shah Faesal joining us from Srinagar, talking about the situation in Kashmir, as 10,000 more troops will be deployed, as the Indian Home Ministry has just announced. And with that, we'll take a quick short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Dan Coats, is to step down next month. U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted the news of Mr. Coats stepping down on a Sunday. And by the time Mr. Coats does leave, he will be the second longest serving Director of National Intelligence. Now, of course, the Congress still has to approve the position for the replacement for the Director of National Intelligence. Mr. Coats, who is known to have not seen things the way the President Donald Trump did, especially on foreign policy and security. He was known to have frequently disagreed with the president on a number of major foreign policy issues, especially on U.S.'s policy towards Russia, North Korea's nuclear weapons program, and also whether Iran violated the 2015 nuclear deal that President Trump then eventually withdrew from in 2018. So we're going to be looking at in this segment of the show whether this resignation was something forced, or was there enough reason for him to resign, as media is speculating across the world, or the conflict or the issues he had with the president, and the new replacement that President Donald Trump has tapped. Is he fit for the job? Let me introduce this guest who will be talking today. We have with us Mr. David Sedney, an analyst joining us from Kabul, and also Mr. Albert Eisenberg, a Republican consultant joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to both of you to the show. Before we get into how this move is seen by both of you, let me ask you this, Mr. Eisenberg, about the importance and the kind of responsibility that goes with the position of Director of National Intelligence. Now, this was recently created just in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And as we understand it, that it kind of overlooks 17 different intelligence agencies. Could you tell us a little about whether this role of director is overseeing all the other 17 intelligence agents? How does it work?
Well, you're definitely correct that it's a key role that was created at a key time in the U.S. foreign policy juncture post 9/11. This is a role that has historically, at least according to media reports at this point, been called nonpartisan. Obama had several people in the role, including somebody who resigned after a year and a half. So it's not necessarily clear that Dan Coats is being forced out at the age of 76. He's served a long time. But the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, oversees a lot of key agencies and shepherds in agencies that belong to many different bureaucracies in the U.S. government. So it's definitely a key role. It's traditionally somebody who is a little bit behind the scenes, a good organizer, and somebody who might be seen as a little bit more nonpartisan than somebody who perhaps goes on TV and makes inflammatory remarks, which is what the replacement John Ratcliffe is being held as. Not to comment on that necessarily.
Okay, and it also entails this post, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, a sort of a daily brief is to be prepared on major security issues, foreign policy issues. That is really the DNI's sort of jurisdiction, that he's the go-to person for the president on these matters. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a cabinet level position that will be briefing the president directly, and again, shepherds in many different agencies that belong to different departments in a very, very large bureaucracy, many of whom are firing on different cylinders at different points. So it's certainly a key role, and the Senate Intelligence Committee will be very, very wary and very scrupulous, both the Democrats and the Republicans, on the next nominee, because it's quite important for our national security and obviously for our information sharing internationally.
Okay. So, Mr. Sedney, let me ask you then, in your opinion, how do you see this resignation of Dan Coats, and also the sort of speculation in the different sort of reports coming out that this was a resignation that he penned down a week ago?
Well, I think the news reports are pretty clear that Mr. Coates was really on the way out for a while. He was the last remaining voice of what I would call the center of the Republican Party at the top of the national security apparatus. President Trump clearly never cottoned to him, that never really felt that they were on the same page, and reportedly in the past has sought his resignation. However, Mr. Coates is from Indiana and has a long political heritage there. Vice President Pence was also from Indiana, and he have been long time, not necessarily allies, but close in many ways, working to build the Indiana Republican Party. So even though President Trump wanted him out, Vice President Pence wanted him to stay. But as President Trump moves into election season, he wants somebody in every position who is working for him politically. And after he saw Mr. Ratcliffe on the in the questioning that he did of Special Counsel Mueller, he said, "That's the guy I want." So I would say this is 100% political, and it's very, very dangerous for the future of U.S. national security.
It's interesting you mention the questioning of Robert Mueller, because a lot of analysts have seen Mr. Ratcliffe's questioning rather caustic, almost to the point where he was, without any sort of hiding it, very biased. Do you think that was pretty much what sealed the deal for Mr. Ratcliffe, or he was the kind of point man that Mr. Trump was looking for in the first place?
I think he was probably the kind of point man Mr. Trump was going after in the first place, but in terms of the actual decision-making process of President Trump, no one that I know really claims to understand all the reasons that go into that. Was it a spur-of-the-moment decision based on what he saw on television or a long planned? I think people really have no idea.
Okay, and do you think, considering the kind of experience Mr. Ratcliffe brings for this position, which is highly of a sensitive nature, its intelligence, its security, all across America, across the world, do you think Mr. Ratcliffe is the kind of candidate who would be fit for the job?
On his resume, absolutely not. Both the Republican and Democratic, the chair and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, have already signaled some concerns about that. When he was appointed to the Intelligence Committee, there was severe criticism of the lack of his credentials, and the way he has behaved as a congressman, calling into question his willingness to keep classified information secret. You'll see that a number of former high-ranking intelligence officials have said that this is a very dangerous move for U.S. national security, and I would agree.
After hearing that, I wonder if President Trump has selected a guy who will tell him what he wants to hear as compared to what he needs to hear.
My own view is that Mr. Trump, in every position relating to national security, has been doing that, and every new appointment he's put in place has been somebody who is closer to his own political views and to him personally. He wants to get reelected, and he's putting people in these positions who will help him get reelected. He's not doing it for U.S. national security.
So if you were to put a count on this, Mr. Sedney, on the number of people who have resigned or have been forced to resign under Trump's administration due to the very fact they don't see eye to eye with President Trump, what would that number be on this? Who are those historic sort of names who have dropped from the list so far?
Well, we have 2 secretaries of defense, a secretary of state, 2 national security advisors, and now a director of national intelligence at that level, and many others at lower levels.
So this that's 5 to 6 people, very senior people, and with his election campaigning having started, how does this reflect on the American public? Are they happy with this kind of these changes, and this recent one especially?
My impression, and my colleague may differ, is I don't think the appointment of senior national security people plays a role at all in the election. It's something that people who pay attention to that, people with backgrounds in national security and certainly in the national security bureaucracy itself, but I don't think the average American voters' positions are changed one degree by this kind of decision. I just don't think the way it is.
Okay. All right. Mr. Sedney, thank you so much for insight there on this. Mr. Eisenberg, coming to you on this, while Mr. Sedney feels that it wouldn't really make a difference to the American public who the Director for National Intelligence is, but in the context that so many people in Trump administration have had to either be removed or have left just because they don't see eye to eye with the president, they don't agree with his policies or how he conducts business. Doesn't this sort of convey anything to the public in terms of whether President Trump is the only person who knows how to lead the America to the forefront?
So David is definitely correct that this specific position is going to play into maybe 10 voters in the entire country of 320 million by the end of the day. But what people do care about is sort of an aura of chaos that is coming from the White House, partially which is stirred, to be fair, by a media establishment that is sort of against the president. I mean, Obama had a DNI who was forced out after a year, and that was pretty clear. And if you look at the details on that him working with France on specific treaties behind the president's back is actually worse than Dan Coats, who was a seasoned establishment veteran after several years. But the point you're trying to make, which I agree with, is that there is an aura of chaos from the White House. There's been a lot of turnover. It is not just worrying to the allies. And while the president may think that this is a win for him politically, replacing the sort of old school establishment Republicans that he doesn't see eye to eye with stylistically with more bombastic media people, he is not that is not 50% of the country that is with him on the Fox News circuit. There are a lot of swing voters out there that, while they may agree with a lot of his policies and while they may think the Democrats are lurching to the left, they are not with him on the bombast. They are not with him on the narcissism and the everything's about me, just report to me sort of attitude. And I actually don't think this is a win for him politically. I think it's a bit depressing to see somebody who won't build a coalition beyond his yes men, because the country is not 50% yes men. It's not a path to victory in 2020.
Especially considering the person President Trump has tapped, Mr. Ratcliffe, with absolutely no prior experience in intelligence and the kind of position, the kind of experience this position demands. I mean, it really puts into question the argument that the U.S., now this position, as we talked about, is very critical, is very close to the U.S. president. For him, President Trump, to have someone who he can completely trust, does this mean that Mr. Coates was somebody he didn't trust?
Impossible to say whether Dan Coats was somebody Trump could trust. I imagine after 2+ years in a critical intelligence position, he was trustworthy enough. It's not really a question of whether President Trump can trust his new man, John Ratcliffe. That is, we can say for certain, or else he wouldn't have been picked. It's a question of whether the American people and the security establishment can trust Mr. Ratcliffe. And he may impress, we don't know yet, he may impress the committee. He may have many ideas. And in this era of political destabilization, in Pakistan, we have a former cricket star. In the U.S., we have an entrepreneur. Resumes matter a lot less. And the foreign establishment that has been around for many, many years, they don't necessarily have the final say on what's effective. That being said, Ratcliffe has a lot to prove in these hearings, and it does matter that he, should be seasoned, should be a sort of staid, calm observer, and not a go on camera, throw bombs politician. And that really does remain to be seen. I don't want to say one way or another. It's
also coming at a very critical time right now. I mean, Mr. Ratcliffe's appointment, if he comes, it gets through. It really brings into question where U.S. stands on its foreign policy credibility at a time when Washington is kind of making a very questionable case against Iran. I mean, the world is divided over this. Their longtime allies are really showing their reservations on how U.S. is taking this on.
Sure. The U.S. has definitely been attempting to force Iran into a corner. And I think if you see Iran's actions in the Strait of Hormuz, for example, you can see that they are pushed to the brink, lashing out. And there are mass protests in Iran that we haven't seen since 2008, 2009, Green Movement protests. So certainly, the U.S. actions in Iran have been more assertive than the Obama administration's, although many in the U.S. would say that the Obama administration did a lot to appease the mullahs and offered them a lot of money without necessarily any return. So, I don't think that current Congressman Ratcliffe, is going to be setting Iran policy. I think the Director of National Intelligence is more about bringing people together and briefing the president in a consolidated way on current threats. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be setting Iran policy, but certainly the Trump administration is taking a more hawkish stance on Iran, while simultaneously attempting to sort of pull and draw down these sort of endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Syria entanglement has been a problem. So we're going in a lot of different directions.
Mr. Eisenberg, thank you so much for your time there. It remains to be seen what happens with this position of Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Ratcliffe, coming in, whether he would be fit for the job. And right now, we've got to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. We'll be talking about gun violence in the United States in this part of the show. A recent incident that took place in California during a festival, the Garlic Festival, Gilroy Garlic Festival, took the lives of 3 people, including 2 children. One of them was just 6-year-old and was about to start first grade. And just in these 48 hours alone, we've seen 3 major incidents take place. Now, according to different reports, just in 2019, over 8,000 people have died to gun violence. Out of these, children of the age of 0 to 11, there were over 350 children who also died to this. So we will be talking to our guests about where does the United States stand on gun violence, the President Trump's administration, what the NRA is doing about the numbers that are steadily growing. Let me introduce the guests who are joining us today. We have with us Ms. Linda Feldmann. She's a journalist in the Bureau of Christian Science Monitor. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Ms. Feldmann. It's good to have you on Newswire. But also let me introduce another guest who will be speaking to us, Mr. Paul Brandus. He's an analyst and also the author of 2 history books on the White House and the presidency. Let me start with you, Mr. Brandus. This is obviously a very horrible incident that has taken place in California. A 6-year-old boy, a 13-year-old girl, a 24-year-old man, they've lost their lives. Now, as from reports, we're seeing that there was already a lot of security here in this festival that usually sees around 1,000 or so people that attend. And the shooter, the gunman, was basically he accessed the place by cutting the wired fence. So my question really is, despite this kind of incidents, gun violence across the board that is taking place in the U.S., security measures seem to have gone up in public gatherings. Is that your perception also?
Well, that is the perception, that security is getting better in public facilities. But that being said, Ayza, this is a very open country. And what happened in California was the weapon that was allegedly used in AK-47, a Russian Kalashnikov weapon, was legally purchased in a neighboring state, Nevada, and the gunman brought it over state lines into that festival. That gun could not have been purchased legally in California, but it could have been, in fact, was purchased legally in the state right next door. So this means, of course, that different states have different laws. And if you buy a gun in one part of the country, you can easily carry it into another. And that appears to be what happened in this particular tragedy.
So the reason I asked that question was because there's almost a parallel here one could sort of draw, that while there is an existing problem of easy access to guns in an environment, in a country where literally you could walk in to a store and purchase any kind of, pretty much any kind of gun you wanted. So creating an atmosphere instead to try and prevent or catch culprits who try to incur the violence or to try to sort of break through security, it really doesn't work, does it? I mean, having as many barriers as you want on airports or in public spaces, if anything, just creates a sort of atmosphere of fear.
Well, you can harden any public facility that you want. I mean, airport security now is actually quite good. I fly a lot, and there has not been an airport incident in quite a while. But look, places like restaurants and movie theaters, schools have all been the sites of terrible shootings in recent years. And short of putting armed guards in all of these public institutions, I'm not quite sure what else you could do. I think at the end of the day, Ayza, it really comes back to stricter gun laws, stricter enforcement of gun laws. But there are just all kinds of reasons why this is not being done. And in the lead into your story, of course, you mentioned the NRA, the very powerful National Rifle Association, which really has control over at least one party in our Congress, the Republican Party. It simply will not allow any major federal legislation to go through that could hopefully contain this problem, tamp it down somehow. That simply won't happen. It's worth noting, though, that in the recent midterm election that we had that was quite good for the other party, the Democratic Party, 15 of the top Republicans in our House of Representatives, that is our lower chamber of Congress, who were all NRA supporters, were all voted out. So legislatively, perhaps things could be changing if the Democrats continue to make gains. But right now, the NRA is so strong in Washington that nothing on the federal level, I think, is going to happen.
I'm glad you brought that point up. I wanted to get to the NRA a little later in the segment, but very quickly, Ms. Feldmann, let me ask you this then, that the mass shootings, there's just been 3 in the past 2 days. And do you think maybe they've lost, and I feel really bad asking this because it comes across as really crude, they've lost the impact maybe to sort of shock the people because the number of times they happen and so frequently they happen?
Unfortunately, I think you're right. I think in recent years, these mass shootings have become the new normal in American life. We go through this perpetual cycle of an incident, people die, children die, and there's public officials will put out statements, heartfelt statements calling for thoughts and prayers. There's an attempt to find out why it happened, why these shooters do this, almost trying to understand the psychology of mass shooting. There's an effort to get the media to pay less attention to the shooter, even to the point of not using the shooter's name, so that he, and it's almost always a man, I can't even think of a female mass shooter, that he doesn't gain the notoriety that he may have been seeking by committing this horrible act.
Right.
But I think you're right. We've in some ways become numb to this.
Right.
Until it happens to one of our loved ones, I think, most people they don't brush it off.
Sort of washes over them as part of the news cycle. I mean, there's so many shootings taking place, and at the same time, and not to say there's just shootings, but just the mention of death across the world in so many war zones, conflict zones. But at the same time, there's something that happened in New Zealand not very long ago. It was a massive affair. It's a massive violent incident. 50 people lost their lives to one gunman. And it took a month for them to change their gun laws. What kind of motivation is it that is missing here in U.S. lawmakers? I mean, we talked about the NRA. We talked about how strong they are. But at the same time, we've seen that not even 5 of their bills were signed into law this time round, even though their lobbying, the record lobbying, it went up, almost doubled in the past 2 years.
Right. So the American system of government is quite different from that of New Zealand and also Australia. People often mention that as an example of a country that really made a very quick mass effort to get rid of the proliferation of firearms among citizens, just among regular people. And but we have in our Constitution, the Second Amendment to the Constitution is almost an article of religious faith among a lot of Americans who do own firearms and have had that right affirmed in Supreme Court cases. We have divided government. We have a Republican president. We have a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives, a Republican-controlled Senate, and that produces legislative gridlock. Until you have all 3 of those the White House, both chambers of Congress in one party's hands, nothing will happen.
Nothing will happen. Mr. Brandus, while this is a very sort of, it almost what should be done logically is to make the access to guns absolutely difficult, complicated, or a process that isn't as easy as walking into the store. This time round, with the election campaign having started, we're seeing Democratic presidential candidates making very strong statements to this incident alone. With Joe Biden, he came out and said, how many families do we have to lose? How many families have to lose loved ones before we stop this? What do you think is going to happen now, especially considering that, do you think the NRA is losing its hold here on the government, or it's still a long way before some kind of gun control is in place?
Well, the NRA appears to have some internal problems, some financial problems. There are questions about just how many members it has, just how much money it has. It recently had to shut down a television network that it had because of various internal issues and financial issues. So there are signs that it is a little bit wobbly. That being said, as long as Donald Trump is in the White House, he will never sign any kind of legislation that reaches his desk to strengthen gun control. It would never get through. As Linda said, the Republican Party controls the Senate. The House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Democrats, can pass all sorts of legislation. It has, in fact, but it never gets through the Republican-controlled Senate. So to Linda's point, the only thing that will change at the federal level is for Democrats to control all three arms of power, the White House, the House, and the Senate. And then again, as I think I mentioned earlier, we have 50 states, all of which have various laws of their own. Again, in this California shooting, you could buy an AK-47 in one state, carry it to another. So federal laws are one thing, state laws are another.
All right, Mr. Brandus, thank you so much. Coming back to you, Ms. Feldmann, there's still a question about the possibility of how gun control across all states could be brought on the same page. What Mr. Brandus just said, it seems like an almost impossibility to have the same mindset or Democrats, like he said, have power in all three arms of government.
That's right. So the American states vary in their approach to firearms. A state like California has the strongest gun control laws in the country, according to some groups that promote gun control. Mm-hmm. But right next door, you have Nevada, where this 19-year-old bought the weapon. And their gun laws are much more lax. They're somewhere in the middle. They're not the most lax, but they're moderate. Mm-hmm. But the federal system in this country is a key part of the structure of the United States, and getting all 50 states on the same page. Congress could do that, Washington could do that, but we've already explained why they can't, why they won't. So it's up to the states, and they're, I think, never going to be in line.
Never going to be in line. Let me introduce another guest who's joining us, Mr. Danny Bowman. He's an analyst and also the head of campaigns at Parliament Street. Welcome to the show, Mr. Bowman. We're talking about how difficult it is to control gun violence in the United States because of the way the system works in terms of introducing laws against the easy access to such weapons. But what I want to ask you specifically is that it creates also an environment where there is constant fear because of the fact that they're so easily available. And we're talking about not just to adults, but to young adults. And as in this case of the Gilroy Festival, a 19-year-old, we are seeing a lot of commonality here. A lot of young individuals are behind such atrocious mass murders. How does this reflect of the society that this happens in?
Well, I think, we live in a society, in the United States, especially, where guns are readily available, and they're readily available to young people. And unfortunately, in certain cases, as we've seen in California, sadly, young people, that young person chose to use it. But I think this comes back to a bigger point. I think this comes back to how, going on how laws are brought through. I think every time we see a mass shooting like this, unfortunately, a number of representatives don't show a moral backbone, and they don't want to work, with Democrats especially, in bringing forward sensible gun legislation that would stop events like this happening. So my word to every single representative in the United States would be to get behind some more sensible gun control to stop young people from actually getting these guns in the first place. Because if we eliminate the guns, then events like this wouldn't happen.
But the problem with that is that in order for them to appeal to logic in coming together, work together on more sort of effective laws, it will be the lobbying firms behind these very members of Congress and Senate, because let's face it, there is a factor of self-interest here.
Yes, of course, and that's completely right. You know, the National Rifle Association, the NRA, are so ingrained into the fabric of American politics. And unfortunately, representatives take, last year in 2016, they provided $4 million to politicians for certain campaigns. That's unacceptable unless we can start to move away from that, how much they're ingrained in the system. Right. Then unfortunately, certain representatives aren't going to be able to find their moral backbone to actually get behind sensible gun legislation that will inevitably save lives and stop, families from across America who had to suffer the horrors of this, and they won't have to suffer that anymore.
All right, Mr. Bowman there joining us from UK. Thank you so much, Mr. Danny Bowman and Ms. Linda Feldmann, for giving us your time here on Newswire. We were talking about gun violence in the US and how in the past 2 days there have been 3 major incidents of gun violence. But that's all the time we have. We will be seeing you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.